Hi, I'm Dave Atkinson, and welcome to Life on the Strait. We now move to the next section of the book, California. We finally depart Portland, Oregon for California, making one unexpectedly joyful final stop on the Oregon coast before settling in close to the Northern California city of Eureka. Thank you for following Life on the Strait. If you enjoy this content, please subscribe to this channel, which is free, and like and share as well. Motorhomes are generally built to be used in moderate to warm weather. When the temps hover at or below freezing, it can get cold inside. The reasons are many. Less space in the walls for insulation, no insulation where the walls join at 90-degree angles, no dead airspace below the chassis, having to open the vents, and that's letting hot air escape in the process when cooking with a propane cooktop or oven, and having an abundance of single-pane windows throughout. The windows present another problem, condensation. In a relatively small space with two people, the moisture builds up quickly and the windows sweat. If you don't constantly mop up that sweat with towels or rags, the moisture will turn to mold, and that is the last thing that you want inside of your coach. And there are other problems as well, such as water and sewer hoses freezing, and the need to frequently fill up the onboard propane tank. During our nearly 8 weeks spent east of Portland next to the Columbia River, we had to pay a premium for a mobile propane truck that made the rounds throughout the campground in order to keep our tank full without having to break camp each time. When we first set out on our adventure back in May, we thought that we'd be in warm California or Arizona long before now. But our problem tenant in Idaho, along with our defective table, conspired to keep us up north until those issues were resolved. Finally, pulling out of our Portland area campground on December 5th felt so good. I had taken G2 out a few weeks prior to get her gassed up, so our 245-mile journey to the Coos Bay area could be driven without a fuel stop. Buzzy was happy to be out on the road again. When we'd be driving, Amy would put his blanket up near the engine hump in the floor, commonly called the doghouse to Buzzy's chagrin, and the vibrations of the engine would send him off to sleep. As US 101 comes into North Bend, our route required us to take a hard right turn onto Newmark, which immediately climbed up a steep hill. I always tried to keep my speed down when making turns so that our cargo would stay put behind the doors and in the drawers, but this time I must have taken the turn a little fast as we heard a crashing noise of drawers flying open towards the rear of the coach. We continued to the little town just west of Coos Bay called Charleston, which is where Oceanside RV Resort was located, our home for the next 3 nights. This was a wonderful RV park, with flat, spacious sites and trails leading to its own private stretch of beach. They had a nice little office and camp store, and in addition to RV campsites, they offered rental cabins and restored Airstream trailers as well. Near the office and the store was a dog wash station and a crab cooking and cleaning station, and the whole place was just neat as a pin. Once we got G2 all set up, we looked at the situation in the back where the drawers had come out, and it was not good. The drawer tore the slide brackets apart, and the little BBs that allowed the drawers to roll out were all over the carpet. But then we saw something even worse. The plywood flooring below the broken drawer was soaking wet. Had the drawer not flown out of that bad corner, we might not have known about the leak until it became more of an issue. We emptied the items stored in the wardrobe out so I could get to an access door that led to the water lines leading to the washing machine, but the fittings were all tight with no visible water leaks. The nearest Camping World store that was also a Winnebago dealership was located in Vacaville, California, and the soonest that they could squeeze us in was on the 16th. G2 also developed another problem that Vacaville would have to look at, and that was with their hot water tank. This is one of those RV quote-unquote marvels that is just so spiffy. G2's hot water tank held 10 gallons, but it had numerous ways to heat up the water. The most common was using electricity when G2 was plugged into shore power or running off a generator. The water could also be heated with propane, or if you really wanted it hot in a hurry, it could be heated by electricity and propane at the same time. It was also heated by G2's engine when it was running, thanks to insulated pipes that channeled the engine coolant to wrap around the hot water tank. That way we had hot water as soon as we arrived at a campsite. Our issue was that it was not being heated by electricity, and it wasn't just a pop circuit breaker. So right after we had all our issues with G2 supposedly fixed in Portland, now we had 3 new ones to address. We went out for a great Mexican dinner at a restaurant in North Bend called La Costa, and that capped our first day in the Coos Bay area. The next day we turned right from our RV resort and followed the road to where it came to an end. On the way we passed 3 state parks, Sunset Bay, Shore Acres, and Cape Arago, along with Simpson Reef Overlook. The sea lines off the coast, resting on numerous small islands, were thick. Thousands of them, all making their sea lion calls at the same time, just noisy as all get out. The rock formations as the land transitioned into the ocean were equally stunning. We had never seen anything like this before, and our cameras were being put to good use trying to capture a little of the awe that we were witnessing. That evening we attended the Shore Acres Holiday Lights event. Shore Acres featured several gardens, formal, rose, and oriental, with a big pond and with several structures, and that would be a gift shop, garden house, gazebo, pavilion, and greenhouse. During the Christmas season, they erected additional structures such as orca whales, turtles, insects, and other animals, and then they lit everything up. The trees, gardens, pond, and structures. It was like zoo lights without the zoo, and it was totally charming. Little Coos Bay was really punching above their weight to put on a show like that. The next day we headed south to the little town of Bandon. Just north of town was Bullard's Beach State Park. We drove out to the north jetty of the Coquille River, which featured a lighthouse built in 1896. The mouth of the river spawned some violent swells as it emptied out into the Pacific Ocean. We were just hiking along the beach area when we stumbled upon a porcupine, just minding its own business next to some driftwood. We had never seen one in a while before, so it was a real treat. On the way back out to US 101, we swung into the campground. Now, it was all set up for people who had horses with trails heading off in all directions and even corrals, and one which had a little deer munching away on the grass. An even better treat was in town, and that was the Face Rock Creamery, a micro cheese factory much in the same vein as microbreweries. The 2-story building was beautiful, and from the upstairs eating area you could look down through the windows at all of the machinery that is used to make cheese. On the ground level were coolers packed with all kinds of cheese, with sample plates over each variety. Their horseradish cheese was to die for. We bought a few different cheeses and then treated ourselves to a waffle cone overflowing with delicious ice cream. And that was just the kiddie size at a kiddie price. They also sold wine, crackers, and a bunch of touristy items. Across the street from the Creamy was Old Town Bandon. It was getting late and we didn't have the time to park and go through the shops, so we called it a day and headed back to our campsite. The weather report had us concerned about our travels the next day. A storm system was sitting off the northern coast of California and the forecast was for major winds and rain, so we were back on the road by 9 a.m., driving 205 miles south towards Arcata, which was a suburb of Eureka. Right before we crossed over into California, we filled G2 up at the Fred Meyer's store in Brookings. It was some tight maneuvering as I headed G2 towards the one-way gas pumps facing the correct direction, as we had to turn up into a section of the parking lot with angled parking. I swung as wide as I could possibly go and watched as our Toad barely made the turn without hitting a car, but it all worked out. That would have been an awkward situation had our car not been able to negotiate the turn. Soon after crossing the border, we came upon a large herd of elk, and later there were two magnificent elk bucks with large racks just off the freeway. No one was behind us, so I was able to slow down and snap some nice photos through my side window. We finally pulled into the Mad River Rapids RV park by early afternoon. It had been a wet and sometimes windy journey, but we made it in one piece. We would call this campsite our home for the next 6 days. We found a Mexican restaurant for a late lunch, early dinner, and called it good. The next day the storm made its presence known as we decided to stay put inside the coach, doting on Buzzy and watching TV. The following day was much nicer, so we drove south to the Humboldt Bay National Wildlife Refuge. We walked several miles along the various paths scattered throughout the refuge and photographed an egret and a white-tailed kite. A good photo of the former, but unfortunately not the latter. The weather was changing with a few lightning strikes in the area, so we headed into the visitor center to look at the exhibits. Then we drove out to the beach and north to the South Jetty. Along the way, we passed kind of a chain gang of goats. They were constrained by a taut rope where they were walking along and eating the brush and weeds along the side of the road. Next to the jetty, we had a clear view as massive waves and swells from the storm came through the channel into Humboldt Bay. At times, they completely swamped the huge boulders that made up the jetty. It's like Mother Nature was saying, "You think that you're in charge? Hold my beer." Balancing things out, we drove north to Eureka and then headed out to look at the North Jetty. The road out to the beach first travels over 3 islands, Dabby, Woodley, and Tillawat. And then once you get back on the mainland, you take a left and follow the road to the end. The road doesn't get as close to the North Jetty as it did to the South Jetty, so the views were not even worthy of getting out to take photos. On the way back to Eureka, we pulled into the parking lot of the sprawling Samoa Cookhouse, where we would soon return. On the way down to the North Jetty, we decided to pull off the road into Woodley Island and check out the marina, which had views looking directly across the bay at downtown Eureka. We ordered up some lunch while we were there, and then sat back and took in the cloudy and rainy weather along with all the boats coming and going. Our first impressions of the Eureka area were of poverty and homelessness. There was no vibrancy to the city at all, with zombie-looking people walking throughout the streets. The cold and gloomy weather seemed to fit the place. Arcata was nicer as it had more of a college town vibe to it, and that's Cal Poly Humboldt College sits on the eastern edge of town. We drove down to Eureka's Bayshore Mall and that was one of the saddest looking malls we had ever been inside. Shocking to us was a minuscule Walmart store inside of the mall itself with narrow aisles and a produce department that could have been a parody on an actual standalone Walmart. It appeared that every other storefront inside the mall was vacant. On the 13th, we returned to the Samoa Cookhouse for dinner. One of our Seattle area friends had a sister that lived nearby, and we met with her and her husband. The cookhouse is an interesting place. There is no menu. Whatever they serve is what you get, and you get a lot of it. They place big bowls on these long tables, and you share the food as if you were all sitting around a dining room table at home. Part of the structure houses a small logging museum of sorts with several old chainsaws, various saws and blades and other tools, plus walls full of old photographs of loggers performing their trade. Eureka is famous for its neighborhoods of restored Victorian mansions, so we drove into town the next day and spent several hours walking the streets, taking in the architecture of years gone by. The premier mansion was built in 1885 to William Carson, who was a pioneer lumberman according to the sign. When we saw it, the mansion belonged to the Ingomar Club. After our walking tour of the Victorian Mansion District, we drove north to look at some of the redwood trees that Northern California is famous for. The place we ended up was at the popular Lady Bird Johnson Grove. We may have seen one or two other people, so we basically had the woods to ourselves. We walked the 1.5-mile loop trail through the grove to see this old growth forest up close. On this trail was a plaque where Redwood National Park was dedicated back in 1968. Everything about these trees were remarkable. Their height and width, their unique bark, and their ability to continue to live even with the middle of the tree completely burned out. Standing next to one of these giants was a humbling experience.